Oh, very well. This evening we have the privilege of having Mark and Beth Van Bebber. A great story with them. We were having trouble because of COVID trying to come up with missionaries, and Joe said, I got a friend. And it was like, wow, God's working amazing. And so this evening, Mark Van Bebber.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It is really good to be here. I'm encouraged by this church that you've taken, so many of you, your Friday night, your Saturday morning, your Saturday evening, Sunday morning also, and tried to concentrate on the topic of what God is doing in the nations around this world. I hope it's encouraging to you. I hope that you're being encouraged by all that you've seen, because really that's, I think, the goal is just kind of expand your vision. And it certainly is not about Beth and myself. It's not about the people who were here last night talking about mission to Mormons. This is about what God is doing. And so we just really always want to keep that in mind when we're talking about missions. It's not about us. We're just people. And we are just doing what God wants us to do. And I think that would be true of every one of us. And I want you to know I think that very specifically. We happen to be ministering in Budapest, Hungary. And I got to joke around that, or talk about that a little bit, because people ask me, where are you a missionary? Well, we're in Budapest, Hungary. I can't say I'm in the deepest, darkest jungle of Zaire or something like that. We're in one of the most beautiful cities you could ever imagine. And we don't really have a lack of a lot of things. We can get food and clothes and all that kind of stuff. But we're doing ministry in a different part of the world because God needs to be proclaimed and God's people need to be helped everywhere around the world. And so that's kind of the way we were doing it. So again, I want to make sure, I'm Mark Van Bebber, my wife Beth. We've been married for 37 years almost, coming this October. Yeah, thank you. And we never had any thought of what our life might be when we got married. I was selling real estate. She was a teacher. And kind of just going with this plan going forward. And I remember one time saying, Beth, when we're old, like maybe 35 or something, wouldn't it be great to go and be missionaries somewhere? And I thought she would just kind of come back and laugh or something. She goes, yeah. I was like, really? And it was really interesting. This one time, so kind of how we got called into this, so many years ago. We'd been married for 2 years, and I said, you know what, Beth? I've always had an interest in Europe and stuff. Wouldn't you love to go be a missionary in Romania? Well, that wasn't even possible at the time. It was communist Romania, And she said, that would be great. And I was just like, this is a Sunday morning. I'm like, what in the world? I have such a great wife, first of all, that she would say that. Or is that a really bad thing? Because I was expecting some pushback, But we got to church that day, and this is all just a God thing. There was a Romanian pastor preaching that day at our church as a guest preacher. They hadn't announced he was going to be there or anything. We had heard him several times before, and that was one of the reasons I said Romania before, but I didn't know he was going to be there. And he's preaching that day. And we're going like, wow, that was amazing. We turn around, and people we knew that were missionaries into Romania were sitting behind us. They lived in the States, and they went to our church, and they were sitting right behind us. I should have just kept my mouth shut, first of all. But I said, Bill, this is Bill Bathman. If any of you guys have ever heard of him, they were great servants of Christ. And Beth and I said, Bill, do you ever take people with you when you travel? We're just kind of wanting to see what the world is like. That's kind of what we're doing this weekend, right? Just kind of seeing what the world is like out there. And he says, I do take people. Matter of fact, I have a policy. I never travel without somebody. I'm leaving in 3 weeks. And the person I was supposed to go with canceled. You should go with us. Or you should go with me. No, we can't. We don't have any money. I don't even have a passport. Well, let's get together for breakfast. Somebody says that. Be careful. So he says, we should go to breakfast. So we went to breakfast, and I laid out all the reasons this could never happen. No passport, no money, had to take time off of work. How would we do this and all this? He says, well, if money wasn't an issue and you could get your passport and all this, would you go? Yeah, theoretically, yes. That's all theory. Well, he says, let's make a plan. You go and talk to your pastor, and then go to talk to the Sunday school class that you're part of. And you were probably part of that class back then, right? That was Jeff and Denise's class and everything. So that's how long we've known each other. And 1 week later, I had all the money. We went to get our passport thinking there's no way that's going to come. 2 weeks later, we had a passport. So we went for 3 weeks to Romania. And that was just an amazing trip that opened our eyes and said, I think God has something in store for us, something that we couldn't even imagine. So we started a newsletter to try to get supporters and stuff. And at that time, the newsletter's title we put was Adventures in Ministry. Because it was an adventure. You never knew what was going to happen the next moment. And stuff. And that's kind of how it all started. After that, we went on that trip, decided, boy, if we're going to go be missionaries, I need to go get trained. Because I was a real estate agent. I wasn't trained at that time. So we went to Bible school. Then I said, well, I need to be in seminary as well. So I went and got seminary degree and stuff. And then trying to figure out where to go. That's a whole other story. But because of all these, opening windows, closing doors, all this kind of stuff, ended up in the perfect place for us. And it's just been an amazing adventure. When I was in seminary, and I don't know if this is a true statistic anymore, but this was, way back when I was in seminary, 95%, they said, 95% of trained Christian leaders lived and served in the United States. 95% of the trained Christian leaders throughout the entire world lived in the United States. And that just didn't seem right. There's an awful, there are huge church movements going on in this world. Lots of them. I just said this morning, the largest growing church is the Underground Church of Iran. People are coming to Christ left and right there. There is a huge movement there that God is doing, and mostly, amazingly enough, without the aid of missionaries. So God doesn't absolutely need us. He allows us to participate in His ministry. The church in China is growing. The church in Europe, there are new churches being planted. And so, but what you have throughout the world are a lot of people who just multiplying churches but without leaders a lot of times. And we need good Christian trained leaders and stuff. And we need to be a resource for those local churches. So that's what our ministry does. We're part of a ministry called Entrust, and we are a resource to national churches. We go and we help train pastors, encourage them. I say a lot of times I'm nothing more than a glorified cheerleader. I just want to encourage them a little bit and make sure they're doing their ministry. And we help their elders. We train their elders in their churches a lot of times. Or if they have people that are leading small groups or wanting to lead different service, whatever, go and just help out. We just try to be a service to them. Because in Eastern Europe, especially in Hungary, a pastor, I said this before, kind of a lonely person. And they're not just by themselves doing ministry. Oftentimes they're doing ministry in 1 or 2 or 3 churches. And it's a hard life. We like to come along beside them. And one of the greatest compliments I've ever had, I knew this one pastor who, he had been a history teacher in high school, then became a pastor of a Reformed church in Hungary. And he was just getting hit by all sides from all directions and decided he's thinking he wants to quit. But later on, he stuck with it and moved to a different church and everything's going good. But he told me, he said, Mark, if it wasn't for you and your ministry, I would have quit a long time ago. He just needed to be encouraged. He needed to know that somebody was there saying, I like what you're doing, and I know God's pleased by that. And don't we all need that in some degree, And I find it interesting. Beth gets that kind of thing all the time. Beth goes out and does ministry, and the women come back and always, oh, you're so helpful. This is so good. And then I'm sitting there, and I get jealous because men don't tend to do that very well. It's like, I help somebody too, yeah. And then I just have to go, okay, all right, I got it. It's okay. My praise comes from God, right? So, but all I'm saying, so we try to do that. We're trying to help that pastor who just needs some encouragement. By the way, as an epilogue to that one, that pastor just this last year got elected to what they call Espedesh, which is a regional pastor, which is like there's the bishops in the country and then the regional pastors, which are over big regions. And that guy wouldn't have been in ministry, he said, if he had just gotten frustrated. And he's a great pastor and a really great motivation and encouragement to others. So that's kind of what we try to do. 2 Timothy 2:2, the things you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will train others also, who will teach others also. Pass on that message. That's really how we need to be doing our ministry, whether it's here in America or over in Hungary or wherever we're doing it. Of course, that's the Bible. That's just not some philosophy of what I'm going to do for ministry. That's pretty much what Paul said to do. And so I would just encourage you to think about that for your own lives. Because like I said, the reason for a missions conference like this is to get a view of the world, see what God's doing, and then I hope also to get a vision for what kind of mission we're doing on our own, in our communities or across the seas, wherever you're at. And so from that, our name for our ministry is Entrust. It comes from that verse, and it's got a little 4 over it, like entrust to the 4th degree. Because it talks about how Paul to Timothy, Timothy to faithful men to others. And so you've got 4 generations of trainers there of going out and doing that. And so I always ask people, are you a Paul? Do you have a Timothy? Do you have somebody that you're entrusting the Word of God to? Do you have somebody you're entrusting your treasures with? If you read throughout the book of 2 Timothy, he uses that word over and over again, entrust the treasures that God has given us. Are you entrusting that treasure to somebody else? Are you a Paul? Are you a Timothy? Because everybody needs to be a Paul and everybody needs to be a Timothy. Do you have somebody that keeps you accountable? Do you have somebody that encourages you? You need to find those people. And that's really kind of the basis, again, of discipleship that I was talking about this morning, that is really what the Christian life is all about. If we're going to get to where we're going, which is to be made into the image of Christ, the Bible is pretty clear that we need each other. Christianity is not a solo sport. It's not something I do on my own. We need each other. So that's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to encourage the churches to do that. We do that by putting together pastor groups or elder training, Bible school, and teaching in colleges, a resource. My wife does amazing craft ministries. She is known as the craft lady or the cupcake queen of Budapest. And it's amazing how women love to get together to learn how to decorate something, a cookie or a cupcake, and then you just bring Christ into it. What talents do you have? What gifts do you have that you can use towards developing leaders in the Christian church? Because God has gifted you. God has gifted each of us. And that's all we're trying to do is get everybody involved, in this ministry. Through discipleship, mentoring, we're doing a lot of marriage training lately. And that's really exciting. So what are the difficulties? I'm going through the questions that we had first of all. The difficulties, we were telling before about language. Language is so hard. But language is a good thing too. There's differences. You get to know somebody's heart when you get to know their language. So we're really glad that we've learned a different language. Also, even though it's so difficult, it really, excuse me, no, I'm okay, I think. But it tends to endear us to them that we're at least trying. We may be bad at it. I always say, I speak Hungarian fluently and very ugly. Hungarian is not ugly. My Hungarian is ugly. And that's how. But they don't mind so much. It's kind of like, well, you're trying your best, And there's just something about getting to know the heart of another person in their language. And it's a good thing. So that's one of the difficulties, though. Language separates, but can also draw you together. Culture is difficult in some ways. I would say that Hungarian people are extremely relational. but they have lost the ability to have relationships. Think about it. They had been a communist country, after World War II, communism all the way through. They've learned that they couldn't trust each other, couldn't even trust the members of their own family a lot of times. They couldn't trust their neighbors. Extremely relational people who lost the ability to have relationships. So they're very slow to gain, where we would say, how many friends do you have? Oh, I have 1 million friends. And you can name everybody in the church, but you don't really know them necessarily. You say that to a Hungarian, how many friends do you have? None. I have some ismerős, acquaintances. I have a lot of acquaintances, but not friends. And it takes a while to really become part of that relationship place. I always say that for a Hungarian who is so relational but doesn't know how to make relationships, it's a little bit like a giraffe that has a sore throat. It's like, what could be worse than that? Well, they're very relational people, and they really do want to have relationships with you. Am I taking off? No. And the tradition, they're very tradition-based. Thank you. They're very tradition-based, and so change comes very difficult to a Hungarian. Now, I know that's hard to believe because change comes so easily here. Not here either? Okay. And like I said, I said this morning, please understand what I'm saying. Change for change's sake is not what I'm talking about. But if you buy into the concept that we are being transformed from glory to glory, 2 Corinthians 3:18, there is change in your life. And changing in your life means changing your perspective as well as everything else. That means there's going to be change all around you. And so if we're just like, I don't want anything to change, that's not great. That's not a great place to be in. It's actually going against God. So tradition is really difficult. European countries have been, Hungary has been a country since about 1000 AD. And so you understand that the depths of tradition that have been built up in these European kingdoms. And so it's really difficult sometimes to fight against that. The other thing I didn't mention this morning, when you said, one of the questions was, what are some of the greatest difficulties? I'm going to tell you a great difficulty for Hungary, and it's true for here as well. People don't want you to be there and doing that necessarily. Think about what I'm wanting to say. Matthew chapter 5, Peter is fishing all night and catches nothing. All of a sudden, Jesus says, throw your net on the other side. Okay, I'll do it. I've caught nothing, but I'll do it for you. Fine. Catches so many fish. What is Peter's response? Right? Go away from me. I'm a sinful man. I'm not worthy to be here. You leave me. Jesus says, follow me, Peter. I'm going to make you a fisher of men. In other words, your life, you're not just going to have to do with fish. You're going to have to do with relationships and people and doing something that's really important. But you know what? Fishing for men is no different than fishing for fish. Now, I know, Ed and we were talking about fishing today. I used to come up here fishing all the time with my dad. One thing I learned about fishing, fish don't want to be caught. I may want to catch a fish, it doesn't want to be caught. I have never been fishing, some people have experienced this, I've never been fishing where I just roll my boat out into the water and say, I am fishing. And fish just jump up into the boat. But yet, somehow we think we're going to go out as missionaries or witnessing or whatever you're going to do in your community, and you're going to put out the sign, I am a Christian and I will tell you the gospel. And people are going to go, yes, that's wonderful. Change my life. Fish don't want to be caught. When I teach churches about discipleship, I have to tell them, you know what, the concept sounds good, but the reality is people don't always want to just get on board with all this accountability and fellowship and doing the work and all this kind of stuff. Fish don't want to be caught. That's a difficulty. And that's true for all of us. So we can know God's plans. We can be called. But you have to know the reality is sometimes fish aren't going to jump in your boat. The good news is we're not really the ones that catch the fish anyways. And it's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to go out and maybe put our line in the water, because that's what God says to do. But that's up to God. Excuse me. And that's a big secret to this. You know, if you're going to feel like you can't do your ministry because you're afraid of failure, you're afraid that God's not going to, that you're going to somehow chase somebody away. One of the things I ask people is, why don't you witness more? Why don't you do evangelism? I'm afraid I'm not going to know the right words to say. All you can say is what you know. All you can do, that's why we call it being a witness. You don't have to give the entire gospel of every perfect detail. God will give you words, but you need to tell people what you have witnessed, what God has done in your life, and what you know to be true from the Scriptures. And it's up to God to do this, and we firmly believe that. So fish don't want to be caught. But in 24 years, we have had, I think, a lot of success, and we've seen God changing a lot of hearts. And I look at the men that I started ministering to long time ago, and now these men who are young pastors and stuff are really good pastors. And I sit with them a lot of times and go, you know, I used to disciple you. I used to mentor you. You're so much better pastor than I could ever be. And that's a good thing. And I'm not just like, you know, saying this. It's just such a pleasure to see these guys doing their church ministries. And now we minister together. And that's a neat thing, you know. So one of our friends, Ballington especially, you know, he'll get invited someplace. Mark, why don't you come with me and we'll do this men's group together? Mark, why don't we go to Romania and we'll do this camp together? And what a joy to be ministering alongside those people that you were training. And so, you know, I see those kinds of things all the time. One of the greatest joys that I have in ministry is that, and I started feeling like a missionary. I told you, a lot of times people say, you're a missionary, and go, well, I'm not really a missionary. I just do my ministry in Budapest, Hungary. You know, it's so easy. It's, you know, if I don't have a pith helmet or, you know, live in Africa or anything, I don't have to eat crickets, anything like that, you know. So, but one of the places I go that's kind of makes me feel more like a missionary, I go down to Serbia every month. And there's some churches down there. There's some large gypsy churches that we've done stuff in. But mostly we go down to this city of Novi Sad. It's 3 hours from our door to the church down in Novi Sad, so it's not very far. We can do that once a month, and we're training their elders, training their church leaders and stuff. This is a church that I get more out of probably than what I put into it, I think, really. I mean, it's a great pleasure to be there. This is a church where probably 70% of the people in that church are former drug addicts, mostly heroin. And many of these guys that I've trained had been heroin addicts from 10 years old up till they went to prison in their 20s or something. And these are the elders of the church. The pastor of the church is a former alcoholic. And they see the power of God in this kind of thing. And what a refreshing thing. The first day of our classes, whatever we're teaching, I'll say, let's go around and just, you know, tell who we are and stuff. It's just they're so authentic. Well, my name is so-and-so and so-and-so. I was a drug addict for 12 years. And, you know, and you're just going, this is the greatest thing in the world. It speaks to me so much about the power of God. Because, honestly, a lot of the people we reach for Christ, how do I say this kindly? You don't always see Christ living in them. You don't see that power a lot of times. We don't get to experience that with them. They're pretty great people to begin with. Now they've accepted Christ. I mean, that's the kind of way we look at it, right? But here's just transformed lives in front of you. And God is doing amazing things. So I see these churches in Serbia that 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I wouldn't have been allowed into because I'm an American, and they really don't like Americans very much. And they're learning, excuse me, they're learning by our sides. They're with us, and they're enjoying us, and we have such a great relationship. We go down to the gypsy churches. I told this morning about some of the stuff that's happening in some of the Middle Eastern countries that our ministry works in, and how we see just God is just doing amazing things. And it's not about us as missionaries. It really is. It's about what is God doing. And I kept referring to that C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia. Aslan is on the move. Aslan is on the move. If you're sitting there and you're looking around and you're thinking, what is going on with this world of ours? What's going on in this country? Doesn't God know? Yeah, He knows, because you know what? He is on the move. The first two verses of the book of Daniel. I teach the book of Daniel, at least go all the way through it at least twice a year at these different places. First two verses of Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar, in the third year of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar set siege against Jerusalem. And God gave Jehoiakim into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. What we see is two different things. You have the plans of man, I'm going to set siege, which mean nothing if God's not in those plans. But here's the reality. God gave them over to Babylon. How do I know God did that? Because He told it to Isaiah. He told it to Jeremiah 100 years before this ever happened. That's how I know God did it. So whenever I start that book, I always say, if you look around you and you see chaos, you're not seeing God. If you think this world has no hope, you're not seeing God. If you think that there's nothing you can do about it, you're not understanding the power of God. Because God is not a God of chaos. It just might look like chaos to us. We pray with God. God, I don't understand what you're doing right now in this world, but I know you're in control. Use me if you want, if you can, but you do your will on this earth. And that's kind of the crux of the ministry. I want to leave you just with a couple of words as well. And I hope will be encouragement, because we talked about what's going on in the world. But I also want to kind of tell you about, some encouragement for you personally. Talking about the world and missionaries is one aspect of a mission weekend. The other part of it is I really want to encourage you to be doing mission. And whatever that means. Whether, going to Mexico or going to a community around you or staying here and talking with your neighbors, whatever that might be, we learn a lot about God through service and through mission. And we need to be active in doing this. I wanted to read just a couple of verses. These are some verses that I think my wife mentioned these this morning also if you were at the ladies' group. This is in Luke chapter 17. By the way. And I'm going to read verses 5 through 10. The apostles said to the Lord, so Jesus has been healing people, doing miracles, all this kind of amazing stuff. The disciples had already gone out, and they were sent out, in front of him. The 70 were sent out, and they came back rejoicing, that even the demons listened to them. And the apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. That was what they said. Increase our faith. Sounds like a kind of a good thing, actually, doesn't it? I mean, if you as a pastor were sitting here and people came and said, help us, increase our faith, you'd be, that's a good thing. It's interesting, though. Jesus didn't take it that way necessarily. Jesus kind of rebukes them a little bit. We're going to see that. And I think there's a reason for this. Jesus replied, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. And that's the first thing he said. He said, they came and said, increase our faith. We want to do great things. That's really what they're saying. We want to do great things. We want to do better things. You've been healing people. We want to do those things too. Increase our faith. See, they had the misconception that they were missing something. They had the misconception that they didn't have enough faith to do the things that they wanted to do for God. And he says, wait a minute. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, you've got a lot of power. Well, how big is a mustard seed? Yeah, you can't even see it hardly, can you? I remember it used to be a real fashion that people had mustard seeds in little necklaces and stuff, because they're so small. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, and that's the smallest thing Jesus could point to, basically. He's saying, if you have that small of a faith, which, by the way, if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, how much faith do you have in Jesus? I don't know, but I'll bet it's more than a mustard seed. It's at least a mustard seed. If you have the faith enough to say, Jesus, I need you in my life, take me, forgive me of my sins, I want to trust in you, I guarantee you, if you're here and you've said that, you have the faith of a mustard seed. You don't have to ask for more faith. You don't have to say, I can't do anything significant unless you give me faith. See, when we say that, it's almost like we're blaming Jesus. I could do things more significant if you would just give me more faith. You know, I could be something for you, God, if you just gave me more abilities. If you just gave me more faith. And Jesus says, wait a minute. If you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, get up, get into the sea, and it's going to go. Now, they were in Jerusalem. That's a long ways from the sea, by the way. That thing's going to be like a rocket into the sea. But a mulberry tree, anybody ever had a mulberry tree in their yard? They have terrible root system. Goes down deep, and so you don't take out a mulberry tree easily. If you have the faith of a seed of a mulberry, preacher, you're preaching falsehoods. No, heresy. If you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you have amazing power. You have faith. You have faith in Jesus Christ. What do you need? What are you lacking? What are you lacking to do what God wants you to do? Nothing. He already gave you faith. I believe that the faith you have, He gave you. He gave you spiritual gifts. He gave you abilities. He gave you a community. He gave you everything you need. You have it. You cannot say, God, I want to be significant if only you will be faithful and give me more faith. You have it already. And I just want to make that clear because there's not two kinds of people in this world. Pastors and professional ministers and non-professional ministers. We are all faithful people following Jesus Christ who have the seed of faith that can say to a mulberry tree, get up and get into the sea. I mean, that's an amazing thing. We do not want to insult Jesus and say, I don't think you gave me enough of what it takes for me to be significant. So then Jesus tells this parable that goes along with this. If you have faith, he says, suppose one of you had a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Would he say to the servant when he comes in from the field, come along now and sit down and eat? Would he not rather say, prepare my supper, get yourself ready and wait on me while I eat and drink? After that, you may eat and drink, or may you eat and drink? Would he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do? So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty. I think this is the heart of what Jesus was saying to these men. They were following Jesus. They were watching all the stuff he had done. He had done some pretty cool things. He had been healing people and doing things that they can only imagine. And they want to do some of that. They want to be significant. I think it's a matter of their identity largely. And they're saying, increase our faith so we can do that kind of stuff too. And Jesus is trying to give them a proper understanding of their identity. You are servants. You will do what the master says. Now, praise God, we have a master, because not all of us want to be called servants. We are servants. And we have a master who someday will say to us, well done, my good and faithful servant. But until that time, our attitude should always be, you know what? I'm just an unworthy servant. I'm an unworthy servant, and whatever I have done is because you have given me the faith, You have given me the abilities. You have given me the opportunities. And then you have told me in guidance through the Holy Spirit what I should be doing. Where's the glory in that? It's to God. It's not to a missionary. It's not to a pastor. It's not to any one of us. We want to be servants of God. So I want to encourage you. I remember when I was young, we were driving in the car. I was probably 8 years old. My mom said, "Mark, I think someday you could be a pastor." And I didn't know how to respond to that. I don't think I thought more about it more than a couple of seconds after that. Oh, okay. When I was 16 years old, I think we were driving in a car again. My mom and I talked a lot in the car. She said, "Mark, I've never met a more uncompassionate person than you." So I'm not just trying to put myself up. You get that, right? Isn't that a terrible thing? A mother told me. You know, just think, mothers say that kind of things to their kids? Well, that was a truth bomb kind of thing, you know? And there was some stuff that was going on in my life that I was not being a very faithful servant. And I don't think I was being very obedient. Around that same time, we had missionaries at our church from Africa. And I remember that I was a little bit younger than that, actually, because my best friend was sitting next to me, and we were listening to this missionary from Africa. He was a pilot, a missionary pilot in Africa, and he was telling his story, and he made the challenge. I think there's some of you out there that maybe would want to be missionaries. And we're going to take a second and pray, and I want you to pray if it's God's will for you to be a missionary. So we prayed, and I remember my friend, as soon as we get done, he looked at me and said, "I'm going to be a missionary." And you know what? That friend went on to be a missionary pilot in Africa, and is still a missionary pilot. He's training missionary pilots now. So he was faithful to that. You know what? I got done praying. Well, I didn't. Let me say, I'll tell you what was going on in my mind during prayer. This is what I prayed to God. God, don't ask. I will never, ever be a missionary. So don't even ask. And I think God probably just looked down and laughed a little bit and said, "Mark, you don't know what you don't know." I guess I bring that up because it was not my idea that I should want to be a missionary. And I don't know what your plans are for your life and how your days are going to go in the next few weeks or whatever in the future. I don't know if you've thought about it as far as what you want to do and how you want to minister to those around you. You're an unworthy servant. That should be our goal. God, I just want to be an unworthy servant. If I'm not unworthy, I don't understand grace. I just want to be an unworthy servant, soaking up the grace of God and doing what you tell me to do. The fact is, everything we do that's worth anything comes from God. Amen. Philippians 2:12 and 13. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for His good pleasure. If you're doing anything, it's because God is anything good. It's because God told you to do it, and He gave you the ability to do it, and He gave you the desire to do it. So, this is what I want to encourage you with. This is Missionary Weekend, and I really appreciate that you invited us here. And I'm always a little bit hesitant to say yes to some of these kinds of things, because honestly, I'm not real big on the glorifying of the worm kind of thing, you know. It's like, I think that we can look out at this world and see what God is doing and just praise God and say, "God, you are good, you are active, and you are strong." What I do or what anybody else does, that's not important. But I do want you to just be obedient to the call of God, to be faithful with what God is asking you to do, and to just realize how blessed you are to do whatever it is that God's giving you to do. And that's all we can say. So may we know the power of our small imperfect, weak faith in God, and may we have the kind of attitude that will bring Him all of His glory. And that's all I want to encourage you with. And I hope this has been an encouraging night. So, thank you.